What is up, Steeler fans? Welcome back to another episode of State of the Steelers. I'm your Steel Curtain Network host, Daniel J. And today we're talking about the Aaron Rodgers effect. It's finally done. He's in the building. He has, by all occasions, all accounts, have signed a one-year deal. I know they were pending a physical. I'm not sure if that physical has been done yet, but I'm fairly positive that's going to go well. And the Pittsburgh Steelers now have their quarterback for the year 2025-2026. Now, I know there's some folks that like it, some folks that don't like it. I'm kind of in the middle, leaning towards I like it, to be honest with you. I think that Aaron Rodgers was the best option for the Pittsburgh Steelers as a quarterback position this year, going into, and that includes the draft and where they were selecting in the draft. I would rather have Aaron Rodgers than a Shedeur Sanders or a Jackson Dart or what was that guy, Shock, who ended up going to the New Orleans Saints. I'd rather have Rodgers than those guys. When it comes to free agency and the guys that were there, I still would take Rodgers over anybody else that was in free agency, to be 110% honest with you. I mean, I know the Steelers were inquiring about, what's his name, Sam Darnold. And, Sam Darnold, he had a good year last year, but towards the end, he kind of struggled. And I know everybody's going to look at, well, Aaron Rodgers didn't have the best year either. I get that. But at least Aaron Rodgers has done it for a few years consistently. And although last year wasn't his best year, the year before, he only played a few snaps and he snapped his Achilles. And so, you really can't take account what it was that the Jets did the year before and put that on Aaron Rodgers. He's only really had 1 year in the building there with the New York Jets as a player. And his last year in Green Bay, which was a scenario where both guys were just – Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers were just ready to separate. You know what I'm saying? And so, it's been not the best last few years for Aaron. And I think that has a lot to do why he may want to come back, right? I think more than anything, he's probably a little bit, turned off by how things went these last couple of years. His legacy is important to him. I think he cares about what the perception of who he is and the player that he is important to him. I know that he's had some really crazy bounce back years or some years through adversity that were MVP like for instance, the Green Bay Packers go out there and draft Jordan Love and he goes out there and gets an MVP and has an MVP season. So, he's a 4-time MVP player, competitive as heck. And that's the kind of player that you want back there. I get it. He's 41, going to be 42 in December this year. He's up there in age. What is it that we can expect from having an Aaron Rodgers on the team? So let's kind of break down the Aaron Rodgers effect. Now, I don't know what the financials are. I think there's been some rumors and speculation going out there that it might be about 10 million plus incentives, but it's under 20. If that's the case, if they ended up getting Aaron Rodgers for less than Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, that's a big plus in my opinion. That's a win in my book, and I think that the Steelers had this, handshake deal for a while. I think they were aware of Aaron Rodgers coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a long time. I think that they were being respectful to his time and the fact that when he decided that he wanted to join the Pittsburgh Steelers and be fully committed, was the time that he was going to sign is when he could be fully committed. Now, for whatever reason, he says he has some family issues, and there's been some sightings of him throughout the country on different places, whether it be on Joe Rogan or in concerts or doing Q&As. He's been in a couple of different places, and, it's his time, man. Let the guy do what he's going to do. He's going to be here for minicamp, which I think is huge and a lot faster than what I thought he was going to be in the building. I had predicted the last time that we spoke that he wasn't going to sign his contract till after minicamp. I was hoping it was before the long break, before training camp, so at least we would know throughout the entire long break between minicamp and training camp that, hey, the Pittsburgh Steelers have their quarterback. But, he signed it now. He's going to be attending minicamp, which I'm excited to see and hear about. It starts this week, I believe, on Tuesday. Myself and Shannon White on Monday are going to have a lot to talk about. he wasn't too thrilled about the Aaron Rodgers signing. I'll be honest with you. I like I said, based on the options that they had available, I thought this was the best deal, and it's a 1-year deal. It's a 1-year deal. If he goes out there and he can show that he still has it and wants to play again, I don't think it's going to change the trajectory of where the Steelers are going with the quarterback position, regardless. So let's just say things went extremely well. Aaron Rodgers comes in and he has a flashback to who he was 5-6 years ago. And he is just putting up awesome numbers, 32 touchdowns to like 6 interceptions, and just has a really good, solid year. And the Steelers do the unthinkable. They go all the way. He gets number 7 for us. At the end of the day, the Steelers have positioned themselves with a lot of draft picks for next year's draft so that they can go up there and get a quarterback regardless of what position they're in. And now, obviously, if they're sitting somewhere around 32, it's going to be a lot harder to go up, but they have like 12 picks next year. And if there's a guy that they have identified as being the guy, you may want to give up X amount. Now, to me, I think that if they end up going the distance with Aaron Rodgers, that means that the team around Aaron Rodgers is Super Bowl capable. So all you need is just another fill-in for that position, which is going to be harder than it says, right? Another fill-in. What I'm trying to say is, let's just say they've identified a player that they want that is coming out of next year's draft at the quarterback position that they feel confident in. I'm not sold on the fact that, especially if it's still Mike Tomlin, I'm not sold on the fact that the Steelers are going to go into next year starting with a rookie quarterback. And the only other 2 quarterbacks that are going to be on the roster are going to be Will Howard, who was a 6th-round pick in this year's draft. I'm not necessarily saying – I don't necessarily think that you are going to take a 6th-round pick in one draft over a 1st-round pick in the draft immediately preceding that first draft that you drafted a quarterback. Yeah, I don't see that being a case where, like, all right, well, Will's been here a whole year. He's got the trade value. He's a 6. I mean, the draft value is a 6th-round pick. Those things don't make sense to me. Now, if he was a 2nd-round pick, a 3rd-round pick, and he'd been here a year or so, okay, yeah, I can see how. All right, they're going to, have him sit behind Will Howard. But 1 year, 6th-round pick compared to a potential 1st-round pick, I would assume that 1st-round pick is going to jump over Will Howard fairly quickly. Mason Rudolph, I mean, as much as I like Mason, I don't think he's ever going to be the starter in Pittsburgh on the terms in which he wants to be. Maybe perhaps this year, if Aaron goes down, he can go in and show what he has, and that could be a different story. But not on the accounts of his accolades, not on his arm and what he's done on the game field and in practice. Is he going to be the starting quarterback? I mean, Mike Tomlin just doesn't want that. He's shown that, as reluctant as he was when he had Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. So I just don't see that being the case either. So if Aaron Rodgers does well and the Steelers go out there and draft, their intentions are to draft a quarterback, I can see the Steelers bringing in Aaron for another year and then having the rookie quarterback sit behind him, for a whole year, learn the ropes, so to speak. So there's, and if he just completely poops the bed, then it's just a 1-year deal. You are probably in a better position for that quarterback in next year's draft because of it. And so you're in a win-win situation regardless-ish, right? The risk and reward is where you want it. Very low risk, high reward, possibly high reward in this scenario, a lot higher than what you would get with just solely Mason Rudolph as a quarterback. Because, like, as I mentioned before, I don't necessarily think that the ceiling moves with Aaron Rodgers compared to Mason Rudolph. I think the floor does. So when it comes to Mason Rudolph being the starting quarterback of this team, I guesstimated the Steelers would win anywhere between 7 and about 10 to 11 games. Max. That's if he has an amazing year, 2023 ending year, and that continues to go on. With Aaron Rodgers, I'm still thinking that they're around that ceiling of 10 to 11 wins, but that floor comes up from 7 to about 9. I think it's more defined. It's more definitely a winning record, definitely a very good chance to get at the very minimum, a wild card positioning for the playoffs. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I think it's a 3-point swing. I'm thinking, Mason Rudolph probably average about 23 points a game. Aaron Rodgers will probably be about 26 points a game. So I think that's kind of where the difference is going to be there. But let's look at some good and some bad. We'll start off with the bad. Obviously, age is a big component. 41 going into 42. There's a lot of things that he's not going to be able to do that he had been able to do in the past, which is move around. We saw Russell Wilson get tracked down last year quite a bit. And, I think a lot of that had to do with because he thought he was still Russell Wilson of, 2015 or something like that. And when it comes to Aaron Rodgers, he was never the Russell Wilson type to run around to that degree, but he had some legs and he's been able to move around and he's been able to get first downs and touchdowns through his legs, not long runs or anything like that, but mobility has been a part of his game. And 17-game season, it being a long season, we're going to see a limited playbook. Needless to say, we're not going to see the RPOs or the quarterback designed runs and those type of things that Arthur Smith has liked in the past, whether it be with some of these mobile quarterbacks that he's had, like a Justin Fields with the Steelers or Mariota with the Falcons. And so, he likes the mobility aspect. So that's going to be out of the question. And like I said, I mean, it's a year deal. The age and the injury, I think, are the biggest question marks. Maybe the off-field distraction might be something if he ends up, obviously going on to like the Pat McAfee show and stuff like that and starts to complain about the team if things aren't going well or whatever the case may be. That could be a huge distraction. That could be a huge negator factor for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But remember that, to me, I think this is a humbling experience for Aaron to a certain extent. He had to reach out to teams to see if they were interested in his services, probably for the first time ever. And, playing for the amount of money that he's possibly playing for, we still don't know. But if it is $10 million, you're not putting in, and it's a one-year deal, you're not putting in your future into him the way, he may have been perceived as in the past as being the main focal point. This time around, he's definitely a piece or a part of the team. A piece of the pod, so to speak, of a team that needs all pieces in order to work correctly. But yeah, limiting the playbook, maybe some questions from the media. Those are going to be the negative things. The things that I say that are in the middle. They could be good. They could be bad. One is like attracting players to the team. He's done this in the past where he was. He brought all his friends to New York and stuff like that. Lazar, Davante Adams, etc. But if we go back in time and think about this a little bit, the Steelers were interested in Davante Adams at that time. It was a huge thing that maybe perhaps the Pittsburgh Steelers were going to get him. And he chose Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets because of the quarterback position that they had and what was going on there. Even though I think at the time the Steelers had a much better record than the Jets, Davante Adams still chose to go to Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. So I think there is something there to the fact that he might be able to attract some players that, would otherwise go somewhere else, but would choose to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers based on who the quarterback is. The Steelers are in the market for a wide receiver number 2 right now. Apparently they called and try to speak about trading for Kyle Pitts. That'd be interesting. I'm not sure if the Falcons are going to want to do that. They got their new young quarterback. They're going to want their weapons, but that'd be nice. I mean, they've really contacted, the tight end position that can catch the ball. I mean, if it wasn't Kyle Pitts, it was Jonnu Smith, also somebody that was familiar with Arthur Smith and what he wants to do. I wonder if this means that maybe perhaps he wasn't too pleased with the tight end position and what he wanted to see out of the passing group last year. If he's targeting these guys that are familiar to him and familiar with his offense, that can pass, that can catch the ball. So, maybe he was a little bit disappointed in the ability of the pass catchers in the tight end room. I thought that maybe perhaps the quarterbacks weren't getting the ball over the middle. And I think that's a different thing with Aaron Rodgers that he's going to be able to do. But they reached out to try to grab Kyle Pitts, which tells me, again, they're trying to go back to Arthur Smith's bread and butter, which was highlighting the tight ends and over the middle of the field throws, which I couldn't be more ecstatic for. But the player aspect, I think, is one. I'm going to take a quick break. When I get back, we're going to talk more about the neutral stuff and then the positive things that Aaron Rodgers brings. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Thank you for sticking with us. Before we get back into the conversation, I want to remind you guys of our website, steelcurrentnetwork.com, your one-stop shop for Pittsburgh Steelers news and coverage. Make sure you go and check that out after you're done listening here. Get caught up in the feed. Create a free profile so that way you can go in there and comment, talk with the editor, talk with the authors and the writers of Steel Curtain Network. You never know. Maybe your opinion may make it on an article. All right, back to what I was saying. So, being able to attract other players, I think, is a neutral thing, because is he going to want to bring in his friends? Aaron Rodgers? Possibly. I mean, that's always a big thing. But is he also going to be able to bring in the players that the Steelers want? Like the Devontae Adams last year. Now, I'm not necessarily certain the Steelers are going to target a Devontae Adams this year. I think he's already, got his place or whatnot. But if there's another receiver the Steelers might be interested in, they may not be able to acquire them for less money and or acquire them over another team based on who the quarterback is. And so you can't discredit that. The other thing that I found that was a neutral thing was that he could call his own plays or change his plays. I think that's been an issue for the quarterback position, for some time now. I mean, going back to Matt Canada and Kenny Pickett, and Kenny supposedly complaining that he wanted to do some different things at the line of scrimmage based on what he was seeing. Obviously I understand why you don't trust a young kid like Kenny Pickett, who's apparently struggling really, really bad with the Cleveland Browns. Horrible draft pick for the Steelers, something that I think a lot of people saw coming. Well, anyways, I digress. Russell Wilson supposedly was able to do that last year to a certain extent, and then he did it against the Cincinnati Bengals, where the Steelers ran up the score. They stayed in front. They ended up getting like 40 points or something like that. Well, anywho, after that game, Steelers offense just was not the same, and supposedly after that point is when Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson were starting to bump heads. Russell Wilson wanted to do some things differently, and Arthur wanted him to stay within the playbook. Now, that can be confusing for some young players on the outside and people trying to learn this system. So I understand Arthur Smith's position behind it. You can end up getting a situation where, like we saw, that George Pickens ran the wrong route against the Chiefs, and Russell Wilson gets picked off throwing a Pat Freiermuth over the middle. Now, a lot of people are saying and blaming George for running the wrong route. But is it possible, because of so many changes and going outside of the playbook, that could have been confusing to a player? I think it could be. And so playing within the playbook is what I think they're looking for, not necessarily changing the plays or anything like that, as far as an issue, as long as it's within the playbook. And one of the good things about Arthur Smith and Aaron Rodgers, and this is one of the reasons why I'm calling this a neutral thing, is because Aaron Rodgers has worked with LaFleur. Arthur Smith has worked with LaFleur or through Shanahan. And so there's connections there between the type of offense that they want to run, formations, and things of that nature, concepts. So because of that, I think that we're going to see a better relationship between the quarterback and the offensive coordinator, because this is a quarterback that understands what this offense is and what they want to do within this offense. You know, it's completely different with like Russell Wilson, who maybe had a different idea of an offense, right? I mean, even going back to like Nathaniel Hackett, who worked with Aaron Rodgers and worked well with Aaron Rodgers, couldn't work well with anybody else. But also Russell Wilson was a part of that. Russell Wilson was also a part of Sean Payton not being able to help or be able to work with him, because Russell Wilson couldn't work within the confines of what Sean Payton wanted him to do. You know, you have to have a happy marriage there with the fit and the scheme aspect. And I think Aaron Rodgers probably fits more of this scheme. You know, that's why they go out there and get a Mason Rudolph as backup quarterback as well. Now let's kind of transition into the more positive things, the good stuff. You know, I think the first thing is defenses are going to have to respect him. You know, defenses are going to have to respect what Aaron Rodgers can do and through the air. You know, I think he still has a gun. I think he still has the ability and still has the talent with his arm. And if defenses are going to play the Pittsburgh Steelers in the same manner that they played Kenny Pickett or Russell Wilson or any of these guys, it's going to be very reminiscent of, and even worse, of what maybe 2023 was with Mason Rudolph. And when I say worse, I'm talking about worse for the defense. You know, the only thing that Mason Rudolph did differently in 2023, in my opinion, is he went against the tendencies of which the Pittsburgh Steelers were doing at that point. He threw to Darnell Washington. He threw to the second option behind the first one. You know, a lot of guys at that time, whether it was Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, were just hitting that first option, and it was the underneath stuff, and it was just, you know, defenses were collapsing in. Mason Rudolph, you know, for instance, against the Ravens, you know, he had, I think it was Allen Robinson and you know, the short throw, which would have been the design for the play, but instead he hit Deontay Johnson behind him, a much, you know, tighter window throw, but he hits him and Deontay's off to the races. And he ends up scoring a touchdown on a long run. But that was just solely because he was going against the tendencies. At that time, they were just, Steelers were just so predictable. And defenses were just compiling in. And, you know, with Mason Rudolph, it wasn't so much that he had this gun of an arm or, you know, making all these amazing throws. I mean, he had some pretty good throws. It was because he was going against the tendencies. And who knows, once defenses started to pick up what Mason was doing, you know, they'd have to watch out. All right, well, obviously, if they collapse down, he's going to throw behind us. If we stay up, he's going to throw down. So he made it very difficult. And if, you know, you have a quarterback that commands that respect as well, like an Aaron Rodgers, that knows the difference, who can read a defense, he's going to be able to you're going to get much more honest defenses. And the other thing, too, is Aaron Rodgers has seen it all. He's seen it all, right? He's seen every defense. He's been in the game for a long time. You know, I think that defenses would be foolish to try to hide and mask things, because they're going to leave themselves up for the possibility of getting burned, right? If they try to mask something until the very end, they're going to be out of position. And Aaron Rodgers is a guy that can burn somebody for that. And defensive coordinators understand that. Defensive players understand that, and they know that. So what does this mean? There's going to be less disguises because Aaron Rodgers can pick that apart. And that's going to help out the rest of the offense, because now they're not like, all right, I'm in cover 2, and then it's switching to cover 1 or man or whatever the case may be. What they're seeing in front of them will be more likely what they're going to get most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time, what they see is what they're going to get. And so it'll be less confusion and less you know, decision-making thought process, and more reacting, more playing the game, which in my opinion would result in a better product on the offense on the field there. You know, I just think that he knows, and that kind of goes to the more about the good about Aaron Rodgers, is that he can do it. He can make every throw. You know, the pocket shot on cover 2, you know, the outside throws, the over the middle throws, which I think are the most important, because that's what Arthur Smith wants to do. And, you know, the Steelers really haven't had a quarterback that could do it, or that was willing to do it, for a very long time, or a quarterback that the Steelers trusted to do it too. So it'll be good to see this, to see the entire field used and more of the weapons being used. I'm excited. I think that, like, I'll be honest. So I was more excited for Aaron Rodgers when George Pickens was on the team. Like, when George Pickens got traded, that's kind of when I was like, man, what's the point? You know what I mean? And I think that was the same for a lot of people. A lot of people were really excited because they were thinking, oh, man, we're going to have Aaron Rodgers. We're going to have, DK Metcalf, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, the new running back that actually fits this scheme. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. And I still think that that's all true. We're just missing that one extra wide receiver now. And I think that if the Steelers end up making a move, for a guy, I think a wide receiver it's going to be hard because I don't think there's one out there. Maybe McLaurin. If the Steelers end up getting McLaurin, out of Washington, that would be a big name. That would be a guy that I would be excited for. But if they got somebody like that, I think everybody would be excited again for this offense. I think the biggest key is the fact that a lot of people feel that they're going into this season almost in the same position as they were last year. A future Hall of Fame quarterback. Russell Wilson, in my opinion, is a future Hall of Fame quarterback. One really, really talented, awesome wide receiver. I think with DK a lot better than George, but George was still a really, really good receiver and a big question mark at wide receiver too. And, I know last year a lot of people were, a little bit, they were kind of down on Najee and stuff like that. And I know, we have Caleb Johnson now, but he ran like a 4.5 40 and nobody's actually seen him on the field. So I think a lot of people are a little bit cautious, I guess. I don't know, with his abilities because we haven't seen it. Once he gets on the field and we can see what he's able to do and him hit the holes and his vision, I think everybody will be a little bit more confident in this team as well. But yeah, once they pick up that other receiving threat, I think there'll be a lot more confidence in this team. But overall, 1 year deal. I like it. I like the signing. The last thing I think is a good thing, though, real quick, one last thing, is I think when it comes to the Steelers defense, I think that this lifts them up. I think at the end of last year, I think they started to no longer buy in. I mean, there was a scenario where you saw Russell Wilson going up to Cam, and he's like, well, even though they lost like 4 games in a row, he's like, we're still with it. We're still with it. He's like, whatever, dude. Like, I felt like they'd already no longer bought it. They weren't bought in anymore. And I think they'll buy in again with Aaron Rodgers. And if this defense is bought in and they're playing to their level with the additions that they got, especially to help stop with the run, and this offense can do their part, which will limit the amount of time that the defense is on the field, limiting the fatigue and injury aspect of that has plummeted this defense over the last few years down the stretch. And this could be a very good team, a surprise sleeper team. But only time will tell. Next week is OTAs, and I'll have a lot more to talk about. Hit the like button, subscribe, ring the notification bell. Do the whole 9 yards. 5-star rating, share, comment. You know what to do. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Also, almost forgot, I do still have some tickets for the Steelers games. I'm a season ticket holder. I'm in section 122 in the lower level in the end zone, about 18 rows up from the end zone, right in the middle. So I got 2 tickets for most games still. I think the only games that I don't have anymore are the Miami game, the Bengals game, and the Colts game. All the other ones are still available. If you're interested in going to the Steelers game and you want to get a great deal on some tickets, hit me up. I'll hook you up. You can hit me up on my Twitter at State of Steelers, or the one that really most people can get a hold of me of is at Drunk Turkey Show, which is my other YouTube channel, social media presence. So with that being said, guys, I'm out of here. You guys have a great day, weekend. Until next time, peace.